I know we're only through week 3 of college football, but if you've been paying attention, that does not mean the hot seat ever sleeps. The college football coaching carousel usually hits its peak right after the regular season, late November, early December. But with that being said, we saw Herm Edwards get fired yesterday from Arizona State, and he is not the only one that's going to get fired before this regular season ends. Today, I'm going to look at 11 separate coaches. We're going to do a tier ranking list. We've done this before, specifically with quarterbacks. This is the first time we've kind of done something like this, but I got them 5-1. 5 is the hottest of seats, and 1 is you're safe for now. Be sure to like this video. That really helps out the growth of this channel. Subscribe so you don't miss any of the upcoming content. I do weekly breakdowns for all the biggest games in any particular week, as you see on the channel. So be sure to subscribe so you don't miss any of that. And then comment below any agreements, disagreements, coaches that I might have looked over, which I don't think I did. But if you have one that I didn't get to, let me know below. With that being said, guys, let's get straight into this post week 3 hot seat tracker. All right, first guy up, like I said, this is in no particular order, but Pat Fitzgerald, there's a few of these guys on this list that if their performance was had at maybe a school that was more invested into football, this would probably be an easier answer. These schools like Northwestern and Stanford and Cal, schools that are obviously very academically focused, it's a little bit harder to get a read because, Pat Fitzgerald has done a lot. Here, I mean, he's been there almost 15 years at this point. He was a very young head coach coming up, but especially given where he's at, the lack of resources he has at Northwestern, you have to give him credit. He's done a pretty admirable job, but this is what you can't forget about Pat Fitzgerald and Northwestern. 2019, they stunk. 2020, they had that bounce back season. And, it was obviously the Big Ten didn't play a full season, but they did make the Big Ten championship game. But last year was another disaster, and it seems like this year might be a disaster once again. I mean, listen, I know that they beat Nebraska in the opening week, and obviously that win has lost some value over time. Seeing how Nebraska's looked pretty poor against every other opponent. What has Northwestern done since that win? Well, they lost at home to Duke, and that's a pretty seismic loss because Duke is in the first year of a rebuild with Mike Elko. That's not a team that should come into your house and win. I mean, I think Northwestern was around a double-digit favorite in that game. And then here this past weekend, they lose at home to Southern Illinois. So it's a little bit harder to read given that Northwestern is not necessarily a football-heavy school. But if you're asking me, I do think the heat is starting to crank up on Pat Fitzgerald a little bit. At least it should be because he's on the path right now for 3 out of 4 just disastrous seasons in the Big Ten. So I know he's established, and I get that, but from this is a what have you done for me lately business, and over a 4-year sample it's been pretty poor for Northwestern. We'll see if they can bounce back this year. To be honest with you, if they could just make a bowl game, he's probably not on the hot seat at all, but the issue is it just doesn't seem like that's the case right now. So I'm gonna put Pat Fitzgerald as a 3. I know that's, like I said, a little bit more controversial, but that is how I see that situation right now. Geoff Collins at Georgia Tech is probably the next guy to go as far as the coaching carousel goes. He's in his 4th year in Atlanta at Georgia Tech. I'll give Geoff Collins this. He walked into a brutal situation because if you remember, for a long time, Georgia Tech under Paul Johnson was a heavy triple option attack. And obviously bringing over Geoff Collins from Temple, the idea was to try to move away from that. And so you're inheriting an offensive line that's used to, blocking the triple option. You're inheriting a whole offense that was recruited to play that scheme. So it's pretty understandable as to why, Geoff Collins' first 2, heck, maybe even 3 years were pretty poor. But we're in year 4 now, and Georgia Tech has got basically the same issues that they had back in 2019 when he was hired. It's just there hasn't been that steady increase in production offensively. I mean, Jeff Sims is a guy that's now a 3rd-year starter. You could argue that he's regressed over time. Guys like Jahmyr Gibbs, who started a career at Georgia Tech, are finding other places to go play because they don't believe what Geoff Collins is building there. It wasn't an easy job to walk into. Wouldn't be all that surprising if Geoff Collins got maybe a group of 5 head coaching job and kind of worked his way back into a Power 5 job. But at this point, it seems inevitable. I mean, I know they played Clemson close. And listen, I was the first guy to say that was a very deceiving final score in week 1. At the end of the day, if you're in year 4 at a Power 5 program, can't lose by 42 at home to a team like Ole Miss that, yes, Ole Miss can run the football this year, but they've got their offensive issues. You can't get shut out in that game and blown out of the water at home and expect to keep your job. So that's kind of how I see it. It seems like Geoff Collins, I wouldn't say he's clear-cut the next guy on the chopping block, but he's pretty close. This is a pretty easy one for me. I'll put Geoff Collins at a 5. All right, Dino Babers was a guy that entering this year. My read on the situation at Syracuse was Dino Babers is going to make a bowl game and maybe even have to go 7-5, or he's going to lose his job. If you remember, back in 2018, Syracuse broke out with a big 10-3 season. They had Eric Dungy. They were a really feisty team in the ACC, and these past 3 years just haven't been able to build off that breakout 2018 season. Like I said, 2022 here is kind of a bowl or bust season. He's gotten off to about as good of a start as you could ask for. I mean, they beat Louisville at home by 24 in the season opener. If you remember, they were 5-point underdogs in that game. Here this past week in a pick'em type game against Purdue, who a lot of people were very hyped up about coming into the year. They win at home on a last-second long touchdown pass. I think we've seen enough development with this offense. Garrett Schrader has been a nice surprise for me. We knew they had Sean Tucker coming back, and I think some people overlook the fact that this defensive system at Syracuse has worked before, and it seems to be working again this year. Dino Babers probably would have started the year at a 3, maybe even a 4, just because I think the expectations for that offense, and specifically the passing game, weren't very high. But to be honest with you, right now he seems pretty safe to me. I'm going to put him at a 1 for now. I think this is a situation to monitor. Obviously, as Syracuse gets into conference play, into the thick of their schedule, things can obviously change, but I mean, this has been a nice surprise for Syracuse. I wasn't necessarily expecting to see this level of production from them in the passing game, but we have seen it. You're talking about 2 big-time wins at home, and at least in Syracuse fans' minds, playing Louisville, playing Purdue. Both those teams are either equal to or maybe even better than Syracuse, at least on paper, coming into the year. 2 big wins for Dino Babers. I think this hot start right now is definitely cooled down his seat considerably. All right, David Shaw is kind of in that same category with Pat Fitzgerald. I honestly could have made another category that said depends on institution, because Stanford, probably even more so than Northwestern, is just not very committed to athletics. It's kind of a big reason why Stanford, and there's obviously other issues maybe within the state of California that kind of plays a part into this as well. But Stanford is just not what they used to be. Even 5 years ago, Stanford was a perennial Pac-12 title contender. They're not there, and it's really hard to see them getting back there with David Shaw. He does have talent on this team with Tanner McKee at quarterback. He's got some playmakers on the outside, Elijah Higgins. He's been able to recruit specific positions pretty well. They got a good secondary defensively, but they're just not where they need to be up front. I mean, think about what Jim Harbaugh had in the trenches back when they had Andrew Luck back in 2011. This 2022 version of Stanford is a far cry from that. They played USC a lot closer than people think. But with that said, this is a team that, I think their preseason season win total was 4.5 or 5. So not really expected to go to a bowl game by Vegas. I'm going to put them in that 3. I'll say it again. It really just kind of depends if a school that's so focused on academics like Stanford is willing to make that head coaching change. Obviously, David Shaw has had a lot of success there, but we're getting so far removed from some of that success that it just makes you wonder, how long is that success, 5, 6, 7 years ago, going to continue to buy him time into the future? Because Stanford is no threat in the Pac-12 title race this year. I think we can all agree on that. It'll be interesting to see, like I said, but I'm going to put him in a 3. I think there's arguments for him and Fitzgerald that maybe they could be a 2 or a 1. If you're asking me, just based off production, I'd maybe argue that they're more of a 4. So, all right, Eli Drinkwitz at Missouri. It's still only his 3rd year. You got to remember, they did make a bowl game last year. They're playing in the SEC East, where with Georgia, with Tennessee, where they are now, Kentucky, Florida. I mean, I wouldn't say this is necessarily an easy job. I know Missouri, right when they joined the SEC, kind of like Texas A&M, both those programs had immediate success in that conference and haven't really been able to sustain that. It's still year 3, though. I do think Eli Drinkwitz has recruited offensive talent pretty well. The one criticism I'll have is in year 3, you should have a better starting quarterback than Brady Cook. I mean, Brady Cook is just not going to get it done. I don't even know if they have a quarterback on the roster that's going to get it done. So I think that's got to be a priority for Eli Drinkwitz. Probably should have gotten a bigger name transfer here in the portal this year, and that's something he might have to explore going forward. Obviously, they recruit young guys, and they expect that development, but he's not going to have this 5-6 year period to establish what he needs to establish. Just through high school recruiting. I think that it's time for him to start winning 7 or 8 games. Last year they went 6-6, but really kind of played true to form. Other than that Florida game, which by that time of the year Florida had basically quit. I mean, really, Missouri beat the teams they were supposed to beat, but were pretty uncompetitive when stepping up in competition. Needless to say, I'll put him as a 2 right now. Wasn't very inspired by what I saw when they played Kansas State in Manhattan a few weeks ago. I mean, really just kind of got blown out of the water. Missouri's run defense is just atrocious. And then, like I said, I know they have some young talent offensively, especially at the wide receiver position. They actually were able to run the ball really well last year. But I just do worry about that quarterback position. They are going to be at a disadvantage playing against most of the teams in that conference. So unless they have a disastrous 3-9, maybe even a 4-8 type season, this is not a move that we're going to see get made this year. But it's time for Eli Drinkwitz to show that he can win 7 or 8 games a year in this conference pretty consistently. Don't think this is one that's going to have to be talked about a lot this year, but do think he warranted being on this list. I'll put him as a 2 for right now. All right, guys, want to take a quick break. I know you see this shirt right here. I know you're wondering, how can I look as cool and sexy as that guy on the screen in front of me? Well, I'll tell you. Proud90.com has got all your golf apparel needs, unique but very comfortable polos as well. They've also got t-shirts, hoodies, quarter zips, recently added a ladies line. Browse their selection at proud90.com. If you see anything you like at checkout, use code Fordham. It's going to get you 15% off your entire order. That's code Fordham at checkout. It's going to get you 15% off your order. The rest of the information will be in the description below. Support me, support Proud90. Let's get right back into the video. All right, Karl Dorrell in Colorado. I don't even know really where to start here. I was originally going to put him in the 4, but Colorado is so poor. I think Colorado's issues probably go past Karl Dorrell. It's still only his 3rd year. And what's really funny about this is back in that we've already talked about how the Big Ten didn't play a full 2020 season. The Pac-12 played an even shorter 2020 season. But if you remember, Colorado was like 4-0 at one point back in that shortened season. They made the Alamo Bowl and then got destroyed by Texas. Since then, this program has been on a downward spiral, had a terrible year last year. Their offense was just totally inept. And here this offseason, had nearly 20 guys transfer out of the program. They had to make 6 changes to their assistant coaching staff. And, they've gotten off to a horrible start. Got blown out at home by TCU. Got blown out against Air Force, got blown out this past weekend against Minnesota. If they continue to be uncompetitive like this, which I've seen no reason why they won't be, it's going to be hard to see Karl Dorrell making it past the season, because when guys start transferring out of the program and you're having to start reshuffling your coaching staff, it seems like you're kind of hitting the panic button. And this program seems like it's just in a total downward spiral. I mean, they were projected to win 2.5 games coming into this season, and seems like they might not even get there. I mean, this is a team that could legitimately at this point go winless. And I truly believe that. So I was going to put him as a 4, but things have fallen pretty fast, over there in Boulder. So I'm going to put Karl Dorrell as a 5. I mean, I'll say it again. If they get blown out, these next 2 or 3 games, this could be one that does get made in season. So I did feel good enough putting this at a 5. Still think Collins is probably slightly ahead of Dorrell just because he's had more time and failed probably at an equal level. But do think Karl Dorrell is pretty close to getting canned. All right, Tom Allen at Indiana. 2 years ago, back in the 2020 season, when they went and played Ohio State close in Columbus, beat Wisconsin outright. They had a really good 2020 season. I think that a lot of people bought into the Indiana hype going into last season, and if you did, you probably lost a lot of money because they went 2-10. It was a really poor year for Tom Allen. I'm going to put him as a 2 because I do think that he's a well-respected figure within that program, seems to be a good leader. And, it seems like a lot of people within that, Indiana football community are just kind of chalking up last season to just a wash because quarterback situation was a disaster. What they play like 4 or 5 separate guys at quarterback. They brought in Connor Bazelak this year, who is far from a world beater, but has won them some close games here this season. I mean, they beat Illinois, which was a huge win to start the season for Indiana. And then they just this past weekend and kind of I don't know if you want to call it a trap game, because I do think Western Kentucky is a good team, but there's a lot of people that expected Western Kentucky to go in to Bloomington and win that game outright. So, good start to the season for Tom Allen. It's not a traditional power to where, a 2-10 year is going to get you fired necessarily. It's going to get you on this list, but I think he's had a good enough start to the season to where unless things just totally unravel here in Big Ten play, don't really see Tom Allen getting fired this year. It's still a far cry from kind of the goodwill he had built up 2 years ago after that good 2020 season. But at the end of the day, I think Indiana is a borderline bowl team. I think if they go 6-6, he's probably back. So, and I think that's well within reach now. So I'm going to put Tom Allen at a 2. I think he and Eli Drinkwitz are kind of in that same category for different reasons, but don't really see either of these guys getting the boot this year unless things just totally hit rock bottom. And I think for that reason, you have to put them on this list. But for now, I think both these guys are pretty safe. All right, Justin Wilcox at Cal. If you were asking me, he'd be a 4, pushing a 5, because I felt like this for years. Justin Wilcox has never gotten much out of those Cal teams here these past 5 or 6 years. He's obviously he comes from a defensive background, but they have been so conservative offensively. I mean, I just don't understand how many close one-possession losses can you go through before you finally realize we've got to start taking some shots offensively. I mean, it happened again this past weekend at Notre Dame. I wasn't going to lay the points with the Irish because it was, double-digit point spread, but I had a hard time seeing Cal winning that game. And, he just made a bunch of mediocre decisions with quarterback personnel. It's just a very mediocre offense. And until that gets fixed, there'll be a mediocre 5-7, 6-6, 7-5 football team. If you're asking me, I do remember a time where Cal was known for its explosivity offensively, and he ain't it. I know the defense has probably improved from where it was during the Sonny Dykes era and times like that, but I'm not a big Justin Wilcox guy. I'm going to put him as a 3. Once again, he applies in a situation where he's at Cal. I mean, much like Northwestern and Stanford, that's certainly a place that doesn't care as much about athletics as they do academics. So I just can't stand guys who play not to lose. And every time I watch Cal and I watch that offense and I watch them compete pretty hard when they step up in competition, but never be able to finish, it makes me think that this guy just never learns. He's never learned that at some point you're going to have to be aggressive offensively. So personally, I'd put him at a 4. I'm not going to spend too much time talking about Cal football because I don't really know who cares about Cal football, but not a big Justin Wilcox guy. Don't think he's ever going to compete for a Pac-12 title there. But for now, I'll put him with Pat Fitzgerald and David Shaw in that 3 category. All right, Scott Satterfield. He's a 5. He came into the year on thin ice. This thing has kind of been brewing since after that 2020 season. Scott Satterfield, when that South Carolina job came open, when Will Muschamp was fired, I guess towards the end of that 2020 season, Scott Satterfield kind of threw his hat in the ring, showed interest in wanting that job. Turns out South Carolina went in another direction, and he's kind of got to come back to his old place, and kind of earn the trust of those fans and his players back. Since then, this team has never recovered. In my opinion, I mean, they've got an extremely dynamic quarterback in Malik Cunningham, but they've lost some receiver talent over the years. Didn't think they necessarily played great last year, and it's really been a lethargic start to this 2022 season. This is when you know things are bad. When you're 5-point favorite on the road in week 1 and you lose by 24, you come out in the first game of the season and you lay an egg, both from a player standpoint, a coaching standpoint. That's when you know that this guy's toast. And I think this past Friday night, losing at home to Florida State, when Florida State had their backup quarterback in, I mean, that was a gift. I mean, if Jordan Travis was in that game, probably wouldn't have been, I think Florida State probably pulls away, and that's not a game at the end. But that injury kind of kept Louisville in the game and still couldn't find a way to win that game at home. This has been brewing for a while. This is nothing new. But I do think Scott Satterfield, those guys at the top are kind of interchangeable. I'd put Satterfield ahead of Dorrell. Obviously, Satterfield's done a better job than Karl Dorrell, but I just think as far as timing goes, this one has been brewing, and I think people are still upset over the fact that they came out as flat as they did at Syracuse to start the season. Give them credit. They did bounce back after that with a win on the road at Central Florida, but if we're being totally honest, if Central Florida had just a competent passer at quarterback, which John Rice Plumlee is not, Louisville probably loses that game. Scott Satterfield's got too much talent, especially at that quarterback position, to be as poor as he's been these past 2 years. Think he's toast. Think that decision's already been made. It's just a matter of when. So I do think Scott Satterfield is in the running as the next guy to go. All right, excuse these 2 other pictures. One of those is for a YouTube video, and the other is my logo. We're going to finish off with Neal Brown at West Virginia. I'm going to put him at a 4. I think a lot of people would tell you that he's a 5. I'm still holding out hope that Neal Brown can work out at West Virginia. Obviously, it hasn't been a great start to this 2022 season. He lost the first 2 games. I think the loss at Pitt is pretty understandable. They covered in that game. It was a 1-possession game down to the end. Don't think that was a fireable offense. Coming back at home that next week and losing to Kansas in year 4, that's when you start to lose people a little bit. With that being said, Kansas does look like I'm not saying Kansas is necessarily legit, like a 7-8 win team, but they're certainly not the bottom feeder that they have been this past decade. So I do think that helps them out a little bit. But more so, I think as JT Daniels gets more and more experience in this system with Graham Harrell, as that comfort grows, and West Virginia's got some young, talented players. I mean, C.J. Donaldson at running back, saw what he did in some limited action against Pitt. He ran for almost 130 yards on less than 10 carries, and that's pretty impressive. They've got young talent on this team. What's funny about Neal Brown in West Virginia is that, because Neal Brown is an offensive mind that, came from that Texas Tech coaching tree. But what's funny is their defense kind of carried them these first few years in Morgantown. I always felt like the offense kind of lagged behind with guys like Jared Dagey and Austin Kendall. Those were never the type of quarterbacks that were going to lead you to 8-9 win teams. Well, now you feel like you've got a pretty good quarterback in JT Daniels, and it's starting to be the defense that lets you down. I mean, this secondary got torched against Pittsburgh. They just look bad in every area of the game against Kansas. It's funny how now that they have supposedly figured out some of their issues offensively, now defense is giving them trouble. I truly think that the West Virginia administration has not given up yet on Brown. It's close. He's kind of like 1 or 2 losses away in games that he shouldn't lose to getting canned. I don't think he's on that level of either of the top 3 guys on this list, though. I personally like Neal Brown. I'm rooting for him. Hope he does well. Did make some pretty suspect coaching decisions in that Pittsburgh loss that are pretty unforgivable in retrospect. So can't really blame anybody but himself. But do think there is a path for West Virginia to kind of resurrect their season. So I'll put him as a 4, but he's pretty closely pushing that 5 as the weeks go on. Alrighty, guys, that's going to do it for today's video. This is going to be a weekly thing that I want to do because this is obviously a revolving door of names. Obviously, next week, some of these guys will move tiers. Maybe they move from 3 to 2 or 2 to 4. This is obviously a very fluid situation with a lot of these guys on this list, kind of as I mentioned throughout the video. So I do want to make this a weekly kind of series. Appreciate y'all watching once again. Like the video. That really helps out what I'm trying to build. Subscribe to the channel. Comment any agreements, disagreements, other thoughts about college football down below. I'll be back here on Wednesday. I'll start rolling out my game predictions and my previews here for this week 4 slate. Appreciate y'all watching. College football is back and better than ever.